remarkably accurate. Just to give you some context, the blue chip at the same time was minus 1.5%.
That's an economist version of told you so. Let's go over there.
Coming after.
So the budget identifies the high priority performance goals that agencies submitted, but it doesn't say whether or not those goals will lead to an increase in funding for the agencies. Can you talk about whether you are proposing additional funding in the areas that agencies identified as important?
Yes, the high performance goals, which are new this year, were fed into the budget process and will continue to play a key role. We're integrating those goals with funding streams to make sure that, and holding agencies accountable for progress on the goals. So yes, the goals are and will be reflected over time in funding for each agency. Jonathan?
I'm just curious about what you read into the fact that you are raising taxes to the tune of nearly $1 trillion on upper income families. You have a lot of tax increases on multinational corporations, and yet you are doing some spending cuts, and yet you don't get the budget down to below 4% of GDP. Does that tell you that what does that tell you mathematically about the ability of President Obama to keep his pledge not to raise taxes on families under $250,000? What is the Commission's instructions on taxes below $250,000? And I'm also curious, you've got a debt burden of 77% of GDP by the end of the decade. Do you think the United States can handle that without courting a financial crisis?
Well, first, one of the reasons why, let me start with the first question. I think what that reflects actually is the depth of the medium-term deficits that, as I mentioned, reflected the environment that we faced even at the beginning of last year. You have to remember, $5.8 trillion because the 2001-2003 tax cuts and the Medicare prescription drug benefit were not subjected to pay-go. We're now saying they have to be subjected to pay-go. $2.5 trillion because of the economic downturn. We're taking steps to try to mitigate the economic downturn. We do face a substantial medium-term deficit problem, and what we have said is we put forward proposals to get us part of the way there. The Commission will have to get us the rest of the way there. We have been very clear about our stance on taxes and, frankly, on other spending proposals also. The Commission hasn't even been yet named. Let's let it do its work and see what it can come up with.
So
Jackie?
Is that open? I mean, is it all things on the table with that Commission?
Again, we have been clear on our position on taxes, but we have to let the Commission, it hasn't even been formed yet. Let's let it do its work. Over here.
2 points of clarification. Could you just clarify once and for all, when the pledge to cut the deficit in half, are you taking, my memory is that it's a nominal number, that you'd be like half of 1.3 trillion. The number you've said was the deficit on the date the president took office. So does that mean 650 billion by fiscal year 2013? And if so, you haven't hit that in this budget. You're over that. And
That projected deficit was 9.2% of the economy in 2009. We hit 4.2% by 2013, so we're cutting the deficit more than in half as a share of the economy, which, as you know, is the way economists typically evaluate deficits.
Okay, and then the second one is on the 3-year freeze, when you had said would be held for that share of non-security spending to $447 billion. I was looking on table S4. I don't see that figure. It's some others. Can you sort of reconcile that?
Sure. If you look actually at the bottom of table S4, at the very bottom on page 152, it says memorandum funding for appropriated programs, non-security, and you see the 447 in 2010, and then we actually are below that in 2011 at 441, and then you continue the freeze, 446, 446 in 2012 and 2013. And let me actually pause on this because there's been some misconception too. What's clear from that table is that you see in 2009 there is a bump up in spending in that category because of the Recovery Act, which again was necessary to a key part of moving from -5% to more than +5% on economic activity. As you can see, our freeze is not off of that higher base. Instead, is off of the base in 2010, which excludes the Recovery Act. So the argument that we sort of raise prices before putting something on sale is misleading. We are going off of a base that excludes that bump up. Way in the back.
Thank you. What would you say to federal employees? Oh, I'm sorry. What would you say to federal employees who are slated to get an increase, but significantly lower than the increase in previous years? And also, the budget calls for the hiring of several hundred thousand workers over the next 4 years. In what areas or agencies do you think those people will be hired in?
Sure. First, federal employees will get a 1.4% increase in their salaries, which frankly I think to a lot of Americans sounds pretty good. It reflects a formula that is used to compute wage and salary increases and is lower than it's been in the past because inflation is lower than it has been in the past, and so follows from that observation. With regard to expansions in federal personnel, they have over the past couple of years been disproportionately in the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Some areas where we are expanding the workforce include the acquisition workforce. We have $500 billion, north of $500 billion in federal contracts. Over the past 8 or 9 years, those contracts have doubled in size. The acquisition workforce has stayed constant. It's not too hard to figure out that oversight of those contracts has not kept pace with what it should be. So we are investing in a variety of things to try to improve oversight of what the federal government buys, including cracking down on no-bid contracts, trying to bulk up on bulk purchases of goods and services, and also expanding the acquisition workforce so that we have better oversight of those contracts. Right here.
Both Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Boehner are saying that the Pentagon should be included in the spending freeze, and there is a great deal of waste in contracting. Why is defense off the table?
Well, we need to remember, first, defense is not off the table in terms of fiscal constraint, but in terms of inclusion in the freeze, we're at war, and we need to make sure that we adequately fund our troops while we are at war. That having been said, there is significant constraint that's being imposed under Secretary Gates' leadership. I'll give a couple examples. Last year at this time, we had proposed canceling the F-22 fighter jet. I think most of the people in the room at that time, which by the way was a different room, but that's okay, at the time thought that that was completely unrealistic, would never happen. We succeeded in not only canceling that, but also the presidential helicopter. This year, Secretary Gates has made it very clear that he doesn't think additional purchases of C-17 cargo aircraft or other programs, for example, the alternative engine for the F-35 fighter jet, are militarily necessary, and that we could do a better job by canceling those programs. We are going to be pursuing those kinds of efficiencies in the defense budget, even while making sure that our troops in the field are adequately funded.
And does the decision not to go to the moon not send the message to our rivals that we've given up?
Not at all. Let me be clear about what is happening at NASA. The Constellation program, which is over budget and behind schedule, was intended to do what we've already done, which is return a man or woman to the moon. We believe in the future of human spaceflight. We believe that NASA can inspire Americans and lead to scientific advances. So we do have actually a small budget increase for NASA. What we're saying is let's redirect that towards longer range R&D, advanced robotics, research and development, and find those new technologies that will actually allow us to go further in space and not just repeat what we've already done, especially in a program that is behind schedule and over budget. Way in the back there.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, Kevin Hall of McClatchy. I had a question on the bipartisan tax panel. In your past life, I think your institution certainly was involved in that, and they called for looking at two sacred cows, mortgage interest deductions, and employer-provided health care. Some of that's addressed a little bit in the health care bill. But looking forward as you start this bipartisan process, is something as sacred as that on the